Story 1. I became addicted, and it was either lose everything with the possibility of death or choose life and give up alcohol. I will be 4 years sober this year, and it is the best choice I have ever made. Story 2. I was scared when I went to the doctor and they said my numbers weren't good. I became motivated to change when I started craving a six-pack after work. I succeeded when my partner was honest with me and encouraged me to make positive changes in my life. It paid off, and thankfully, the binge drinking days were very short-lived. I haven't touched alcohol in a long time. Years later, I am happier, less stressed, and optimistic about the future. John Mayer had a good metaphor about drinking. When you stop, initially the level goes down, but eventually everything levels up together. For me, that was true. I won't touch it ever again. Through therapy, I realized that alcoholism ran in my family. There isn't a whiskey in the world worth losing everything I've worked hard to attain. Story 3. Realizing alcohol doesn't have friends. It has prisoners. It was time to be released from those bars. Forget alcohol. Story 4. I watched several interviews with fit individuals, and nearly all of them stated that they do not consume alcohol. Story 5. It just became boring. What is the end game? With all the drawbacks, including money issues, health concerns, and feeling unwell the next day, alcohol is simply a losing game. Story 6. My wife came home to find me passed out on the kitchen floor while our young daughters were sleeping upstairs. She had been out with friends on a Saturday night. My habit was to make hot wings, drink alcohol, and watch a movie. I realized I had a problem the next day when she showed me a picture of myself passed out. It was my family or the alcohol. I am grateful I chose my family. Story 7. I think I might be allergic to it. It makes me weak and dizzy even after a couple of drinks. The next day, I feel very tired and have low energy. It's definitely not worth it. Story 8. I realized it was inhibiting me in every way possible. It made me feel like everything was awesome, but it just made everything worse. I started making excuses to drink and finding ways to do it whenever possible. It wasn't until I got far enough away that I realized it set my brain on fire in all the best ways but was poisoning my body, mental health, and relationships in all the worst ways. Story 9. I started smoking cannabis, and it completely eliminated my desire to drink. I had binge drunk for years, and suddenly, just a few puffs off a joint changed everything. Story 10. I became very ill and thought I might not survive. I realized that if I continued down that path, I would not make it. I am now just over 1 year sober. Story 11. I used it to silence my conscience and allow myself to behave poorly and hurt the people I love the most. It has been 615 days without it now. Story 12. My daughter passed away. I realized I was using it to get to sleep. I had no reason to celebrate and didn't want to drown my emotions. It was the best thing I ever did for myself. Story 13. I was diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver at age 22 and could not function without alcohol. I would experience severe withdrawals that made it hard to breathe, and I needed to consume alcohol to alleviate the symptoms. Story 14. I very seldom drank, but my husband got a driving under the influence charge and he quit drinking. So I don't keep any wine or alcohol in the house because I don't want to tempt him. Story 15. Bit off both sides of my tongue. That didn't convince me. I hit a little lower first and then quit. My tongue is still healing 10 months later. Story 16. I haven't entirely quit, but I'm close. I have a medical condition that makes my face burn, and many things trigger it, with alcohol being one of them. There are other unpleasant symptoms as well, so it's just not worth it for the most part. Alcohol is now a very rare occurrence for me. Story 17. I realized it stopped being enjoyable. Instead, I would wake up the next morning feeling regretful. Although it may not be the best reason, the last time I drank, I wished I had some gummies instead. They have fewer calories, promote better sleep, and prevent hangovers. Story 18. There are no benefits from drinking anymore. I dislike wasting a day off being hungover. It makes me feel unwell, which disrupts my sleep and leaves me feeling worthless the next day. It also affects my digestion for a few days. Story 19. It became monotonous. Every night was the same. The same stories, the same drinking companions, and the same foolishness. I am glad that part of my life is over. Story 20. I rarely drink, maybe a hard cider or a shot of bourbon at a summer party. I've noticed that as I get older, it takes much longer to recover from the aftereffects. Story 21. It affected my mental health for a few days after drinking. I slept poorly and acted in ways I wasn't proud of. Story 22. I lose weight more easily when I drink much less. I get hungry when I drink. I have not eliminated it entirely, but I consume significantly less. Story 23. It felt like it was going to kill me. After 2 days of withdrawal, I was shivering and vomiting, thinking my heart would give out like my dad's did at 64 years old. I have been sober for 2 years as of the end of April. Story 24. I never started. For those struggling, there was life before drinking, and there will be life after. You can do it. Story 25. The judicial system was very clear that I should stop. Additionally, no one will ship alcohol to a correctional facility. Story 26. As I got older, it started to make me very sleepy. I would have a glass of wine at a party and hardly be able to stay awake. Story 27. I realized that every time I drink alcohol, I desire to use drugs. However, that is no longer something I think about. Additionally, I no longer see the point in drinking alcohol, as it is quite expensive. I now view it as spending money on something that ultimately makes me feel awful. As I began to exercise more, I realized that if I were to drink, I wouldn't be able to exercise the next day. Story 28. The events of this morning involved old, shriveled grapes, a pot noodle, eggs for breakfast that were 2 days past their expiration date, and 2 glasses of whiskey from a much older bottle. I'm not sure which of these caused the situation, but everything was expelled at 6 this morning as liquid from both ends. Story 29. I didn't care for how any of it tasted. I was never a drinker, but I tried a few different varieties of alcohol, and I didn't like any of them. Ultimately, I never developed a taste or interest in it. Story 30. Growing up, my father drank heavily and denied it both when he was intoxicated and sober. As a result, my brothers and I channeled that energy and never really ended up drinking ourselves. Story 31. Pregnancy. Now, one drink causes rashes or hangovers, so I do not bother. My husband does not drink either, which helps. Story 32. I started using substances at 13 and began getting into trouble after 18. I went to rehab at 18 and was on and off for 2 years. Nothing serious, just drank every 3 to 4 months. I built a life for myself. A car, a girlfriend, a dog, a job, and a house by the time I turned 21. Unfortunately, I had a significant relapse, the worst I had ever experienced, which led me to become physically and emotionally abusive. I projected all the hate I had for myself onto the girl and dog that I loved the most and destroyed everything in just 3 months. I refused to be that person again. I'm focusing on helping others instead of draining the joy from those around me during my addiction. It pains me that I had to learn this the hard way. I realized I was becoming like my parents. Getting sober this time, I have had to accept my past actions while understanding that they do not define who I am. I'm giving up drinking because I want to be a good future husband, father, family member, and someone others can look up to. I will not allow hate like that in my life again, as I know I wouldn't survive it. Story 33. I ended up in the hospital for a couple of weeks due to an unrelated issue, and I realized how bad my drinking had become. I honestly hadn't realized that I had been homeless for a year. Story 34. It's not that I stopped. It's just that it has become more expensive, and some drinks I like are harder to get. Combine that with knowing it's bad for me, yet it's too easy to go too far, and I find myself thinking, I really shouldn't. Story 35. Drinking alone during the first couple of weeks of the COVID lockdown, I decided to wait until I could go back to the bars with my friends. Eventually, I realized it was better to give it up forever. Story 36. Bad kidneys. 1 Crown and cola and I can feel my kidneys screaming in agony. Hangover symptoms show up instantly because my body just can't handle it. Story 37. I have a girlfriend that I want to keep this time, so I don't want to ruin it by making poor choices anymore. Story 38. Trauma from growing up with an alcoholic stepfather and later dealing with an alcoholic husband leads to many negative emotions. Story 39. It is a carcinogen, and my family has a history of cancer. It was never a flattering story discovering what I did that night after drinking too much. It always felt uncomfortable in my stomach when I drank. I realized that the main reason I used to drink was peer pressure. I don't think it is worth doing something unhealthy just because everyone else is doing it. So at one New Year's Eve party, I decided to stop. And I did. My personal rule is that I can have a drink anytime I want, but I do not really want to anymore for all those reasons listed. Story 40. For years, the first thing I did when I got home was have a glass of beer. I needed that and a half hour of silence to wind down from the stress of my job and to be a good husband and father. Even after retiring, I still had that glass of beer. The problem was I was no longer walking 15,000 to 30,000 steps a day and was putting on unwanted weight. On January 1st, I came down with an upper respiratory infection, but after one sip of beer, I poured the rest down the drain. I couldn't stand the taste of it. I haven't had a beer since then and was down 7 pounds at my last doctor appointment. Story 41. After a 35-mile commute on Illinois freeways, I do not remember how I got home. That was 49 years ago. Story 42. I realized that I need to do this for my 3 children. I want to live my life for as long as possible for them. They love me so much, and I would hate to be taken away from their lives over something so foolish. I still plan to drink occasionally for special occasions, but no longer every day. I have been sober for a month, and I am sleeping better, have more energy, and a clearer mind. I also spend more time with my children. Story 43. I had my appendix burst while it was being removed in 2022. A week after surgery, I was admitted to the hospital with severe dehydration and weight loss, as I had lost 40 pounds that week, leading to my heart going into atrial fibrillation. After 5 days in the hospital, they released me and advised me not to drink alcohol while on the prescribed medications. A month later, I received a clean bill of health and I have not consumed alcohol since, which was about 2.5 years ago. Story 44. I fell at my goddaughter's 13th birthday literally 7 days ago and broke my wrist badly, requiring surgery for a plate and screws. I was called the drunk aunt before that fall, but I haven't drank since and no longer feel the desire to. Story 45. I couldn't go 2 hours without drinking for years. I couldn't go to the grocery store sober, couldn't see a friend sober, and couldn't eat a meal sober. Couldn't continue this way. With no real hope or belief that I could stop, I went to an early morning Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, badly hungover, because I simply didn't have anything else in my life and I couldn't be alone. I haven't looked back since. Story 46. I've been thinking about it more now that I'm in my early 30s, and I'm worried about developing a beer belly. Story 47. I developed irritable bowel syndrome from a deployment, and now even having half a beer causes severe gastrointestinal distress and inflammation in my gut. Story 48. I ended up on the bathroom floor with my wife calling paramedics. I made it just over 100 days, then had a non-alcoholic beer on vacation, which led to a relapse and resulted in me having 25 to 30 drinks at my brother's wedding. Story 49. Alcohol is a substance that steals your happiness in the future and gives it to you now. I quit because alcohol withdrawal is difficult for me. Even 2 or 3 drinks can cause discomfort as it leaves my body. It hurts a lot and makes me feel panicked and scared. I can drink 3 glasses of wine and stop, but 3 hours later I feel the need for a beer, and I worry that I cannot handle it. When that phase passes, I often need another drink. Sometimes I can resist the withdrawal and stay sober, but it's painful and leaves me feeling drained for 2 days. It's not worth it. With my anxiety, I find comfort in alcohol. It makes me feel normal. Story 50. My grandparents, parents, siblings, and cousins are all alcoholics, and I do not want to be like them. Story 51. I was in therapy, ready to finally deal with significant issues, and I didn't want to face the burden of alcohol. It's been a year, and I can't think of a reason to restart. Story 52. When I realized I am fully allergic and spent 9 excruciating hours vomiting and dealing with alcohol poisoning after 2 shots. Story 53. Tired of renting a feeling. It's a waste of money and calories, and it adds no value to my life. Story 54. A couple of drinks often meant cocaine and chain smoking. I quit all 3 cold turkey on the same day. I have been clean for almost 3 years and will never go back to any of them. Story 55. I only enjoyed beer with certain foods like pizza, burgers, Asian cuisine, and Indian cuisine. A friend told me about athletic brewing, and I thought the taste would be good for me. I never liked the effects of alcohol. It gave me a headache and made me sleepy. My ex-partner was an alcoholic, and I believe the alcohol industry is harmful. I didn't want to support it anymore. If more people switched to non-alcoholic beers, it could benefit society. Non-alcoholic beers today are much better than those available before 2015. I had tried non-alcoholic beers then, and they tasted awful. Story 56. I have never been into drinking. I only drank with my brother and friends. These days I have a family, so I rarely see or hang out with anyone, which reduces the point of drinking. My wife also does not drink. We will occasionally open a bottle of wine for a special event, but that is rare. Story 57. Tiptoeing around my brother-in-law's alcoholism made me realize that I did not miss drinking at gatherings with him. Story 58. I realized I only drank when I was anxious. I was married and my husband had a friend. When we would go to his friend's house, I would get drunk very quickly in about 30 minutes. I did this 2 or 3 times. I recognized my pattern and eventually understood that I only wanted to drink when I was uncomfortable with the people around me. This was something I somewhat knew but did not truly understand until I saw the pattern of getting drunk solely when I was anxious. I eventually changed the people in my life and my environment. I don't like to drink socially. I will have a drink on special occasions, but it's about twice a year. Story 59. A temporary solution to long-term problems. Drinking is like stealing happiness from tomorrow. Often, I felt terrible for several days after drinking, and some of the worst decisions I have ever made in my life occurred when I was intoxicated. Story 60. I was invited to a tiki bar for the birthday of a girl I liked. I don't remember leaving, and she never spoke to me again. Story 61. When I turned 21, I immediately developed a serious drinking problem. I had dozens of empty bottles covering every flat surface in the room, some of which were not empty because they were full of urine. I am a naturally slim guy in decent shape. One day, I noticed I was developing a beer belly, and my brain said, "Oh no!" I ended the problem right then and there. I made a conscious decision to improve and stuck to it. I still drink, but just socially, sparingly, and not enough to impact my body composition. Willpower is key. If you believe it, you can achieve it. Story 62. Realizing that alcohol did not make me healthier, thinner, a better father, a better husband, or a better person took 35 years of hard drinking to come to that realization. Story 63. I haven't given it up, but I don't drink nearly as much as I used to after learning about my family history. All of my family members who have died from heart issues or currently have them were chronic drinkers. Story 64. There are many reasons that have been mentioned: weight loss, cost, and I simply don't like the taste, especially of beer. I often feel bloated. Story 65. Seeing an alarming number of patients in their 30s on the verge of death needing a liver transplant, as well as autopsies of decedents with hardened livers. Story 66. I agree with all the reasons mentioned. Alcohol is fattening, prevents good sleep, changes one's character, leads to hangovers, is expensive, and is detrimental to overall health. I feel fortunate that I did not inherit an attraction to alcohol from my parents, so not drinking was not a significant challenge for me. Story 67. I started to feel that I was addicted. I read about the health effects on the internet, and it is poison. Years later, I am much happier. I also saw it destroy some relationships. Story 68. The World Health Organization published an article in The Lancet in 2023 that summarized years of studies showing there is no safe level of alcohol. Story 69. I didn't consciously decide to stop drinking. I just realized that I hadn't consumed alcohol for a year. Now, when I do drink, I feel sick, even if it's just one beer, so I simply choose not to. I believe not drinking has been beneficial for my mental health. Story 70. I took my daughter to the park while I was hungover. I wanted to lie down and rest while she happily played. It made me realize that she deserves better and that I could be living a better life. Story 71. I was using it as a crutch in social situations because I have anxiety and it makes me feel normal. I have also had a tendency to misuse it. Story 72. Almost getting a hip replacement at 28 will do that to you. It wasn't the culprit then, but it is one of the causes. Story 73. I saw myself drunk on video when I was sober. I haven't really been interested in drinking since then. I don't want to be that person. Story 74. It was a progression. After a 1-year relationship, on the first date, they told me they were not an alcoholic. On the last day, while we were breaking up, after we had exchanged our belongings, I mentioned I had attended a few support meetings. They got up, gathered their keys, repeated that they were not an alcoholic, and left. I remember hearing that drinking increases the risk of cancer from the first drink, and I have been taking a break from drinking since last November. Story 75. I was on heavy-duty antibiotics for 2 weeks and couldn't drink, so I just kept going. Story 76. I am an alcoholic. I used to drink a 40-ounce bottle of vodka over the span of 2 to 3 days. I quit doing that and now only drink on Fridays, but it takes so many vodka seltzers to get me drunk. I'm talking about 8 or more. I don't want to buy hard alcohol for fear of getting back into the habit of drinking as much as I used to. I want to lose weight, so I think I will stop drinking completely. There is no point if I can't even really get drunk anymore. Additionally, I lose an entire day the next day because I am so exhausted from the poor sleep the previous night. Story 77. I know exactly what would make me quit: having taste and a limited budget for alcohol. I cannot drink low-quality beer, which makes up about 99% of what is easily available, and I can't stand even a drop of it. I have had one Budweiser in over 20 years, which was 2 years ago. I recently spent $35 for 8 cans of specialty brews. At over $15 for a 4-pack of the kind of beer I enjoy, I will not be drinking much of it. Story 78. Hangovers became increasingly severe. My heart also began to ache from all the cigarette smoking, so I had to quit. It was impossible to stop while drinking, adding to the challenge. Story 79. I love working out, and alcohol doesn't mix with it at all. I am considering going back, but I am unsure at the same time. Story 80. I got home around 6 a.m., but the door was locked, so I kicked it in. She was upset about the bills, and I think she was under the influence of some pills. Then, she threw my belongings into the yard, called me a bum, and slapped me hard. In my drunken stupor, I did what I should never have done. Story 81. I don't think there was a single event. For me, it was like trying to turn a boat by leaning to one side. It took me 2 years of false starts and empty promises to myself. Then one day, 16 years ago this summer, one day turned into 2, and 2 turned into 3. Story 82. I'm a drug addict and I can't drink without needing drugs. I guess I could, but it's not worth pushing through the cravings, or worse, picking up drugs and using. Story 83. Finally hitting rock bottom. It wasn't just one thing. It was a combination of everything. All the various cliches you've ever heard about alcoholism were present. Story 84. I was asked if I could drink while undergoing chemotherapy, and I was questioned about whether I enjoyed vomiting. I haven't had a drink since. Story 85. I like a beer every once in a while, but I don't buy the cheap stuff. When it's basically $1.50 a beer and the budget is tight, it went out the window pretty quickly. Story 86. I started dating a girl who was kind enough to let me sleep at her house, but I needed to leave 2 days a week because her dad would spend the night. I ended up not sobering up enough to leave, so I slept in random places outside. I didn't stop drinking and lost her. I also told my mom I wanted to harm myself during a fight while she was driving me back to her house, and I threw my phone out the window like an idiot. I sobered up, apologized, and promised I wouldn't drink anymore. Hangovers are terrible and seem to get worse. Story 87. I think I developed an allergy in my late 20s. I started getting rashes all over my body and face, and I would have difficulties breathing after an hour of consuming alcoholic beverages, for example, tiramisu. I didn't want to feel like that anymore, so I just stopped. Story 88. Stomach issues, anxiety, and depression certainly do not help with impulsiveness. Additionally, they can be detrimental to your health. Story 89. I'm almost 6 months sober. I stopped when I realized that I was planning my hangover recovery days. It ruined a relationship that meant a lot to me because of the hurtful things I would say when I was drunk. We have since reconciled, and things seem okay. I really love waking up without feeling terrible, and I'm proud of all the projects I have completed. Story 90. I haven't drunk in 442 days. I have always been a regular drinker, enjoying 2 to 3 drinks a night, 2 to 3 nights a week, for over 20 years. However, I have never had a problem with alcohol, except that I want to get as much as I can out of life, and alcohol does not support that goal. I always considered the idea of not drinking. At the end of 2023, a friend, who isn't the most disciplined person I know, posted on social media that he hadn't drunk in a year. My immediate reaction was that I didn't want him to experience a quality of life that I couldn't access due to my drinking habit. I also thought it would be inspiring to tell him a year later that he motivated me to quit drinking for a year. I felt challenged by the fact that someone similar to me in their fondness for alcohol had given it up, while I had not. So, I quit drinking for a year, and since I have found my rhythm and know it won't add anything positive to my life, I have continued to abstain. I may or may not drink again. I don't know. Story 91. Nothing yet. I have had a single scotch and soda with dinner for the last 20 years. It is pleasant and relaxing. Story 92. It tastes terrible. No one drinks alcohol for the flavor. If it didn't make you feel good, no one would consume it. Story 93. All the data indicates that ethanol is another carcinogen to avoid. I have never smoked, so why would I continue to drink alcohol? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.